I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody, to the Jay Heritage Center. I'm Kevin Perino. I'm the Executive Director of the Jay Heritage Center. And I know some of you have been here before. I recognize a few faces, and a few are new faces. And so welcome if this is the first time that you've been here. The Jay Heritage Center, for those of you who don't know, is a beautiful 23-acre estate and public park. It was once the home of John Jay, the founding father, and it's particularly appropriate that we're talking about amendments to the New York State Constitution today because John Jay was the author of the New York State Constitution in 1777, one of the most important founding fathers. He served in all three branches of government, only founding father to have served in all three branches of government, governor of New York State, first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, diplomat, author of several of the Federalist Papers, and this was his boyhood home right here. And these days, when the founders of this place got together, they made a really important decision, and they said, we're not going to turn this into a house museum. We're not going to fill it with a bunch of overstuffed furniture. We're going to fill it with people and ideas. And the idea behind it is to do forums just like this one, talk about important issues of the day, programs in history, environmental stewardship, and social justice. We've had this year speakers, including Samantha Power, President Biden's USAID director, Pulitzer Prize-winning historians like Tom Ricks, Elizabeth Colbert from The New Yorker talking about climate change. So we really enjoy talking about these important issues of the day. And we're thrilled today to have our state senator, Shelley Mayer, here, and she's going to talk a little bit about 5 important amendments to the New York State Constitution, what they mean for you. And so please welcome State Senator Shelley Mayer.
Thank you, Kevin. It really is. When you reached out, I should have put it all together why this was the fitting place to do this conversation, so thank you. But it's really a delight to be here. For those of you who haven't been here, this is a fantastic place, and one of the things I appreciate so much is that it really does focus on the breadth of the American experience from our founding till now, and you'll get a sense as you walk around, but if you participate and get on their mailing list, this is really a treasure in our community. So I'm talking about the 5 New York State constitutional amendments that are on the back of the ballot, and the reason I'm doing so, and I hope you all got a copy of this, is that I recognize that nobody was talking about these things, and they were going to be on the ballot, and really nobody knew what they were about at all. And so I asked the Senate to put together a document, which I edited in part, to at least describe them. There's a little bit of a challenge here because just like when people run for office, we as elected officials cannot recommend what you do in terms of voting, and I'm very mindful and responsible about that. I have my personal opinion, which I will give here, but this document reflects sort of a very neutral, descriptive version of the 5 constitutional amendments, and I will go through them. I'm sorry to say the first is the most complicated because it takes time, and the other ones are pretty straightforward, but I'm going to go through the 5 of them. I'll tell you who supports and opposes those that are controversial, and I'll describe them, and then when we're finished, one, I will briefly mention, because we're in Westchester, the county proposition which is on the ballot, which is also an amendment to the county charter, which hasn't gotten a lot of conversation at all, and I will mention that just so you know what's going to be on the ballot there as well. But let me start with the first 5 state constitutional amendments. Now, just a bit of civics, which nobody is responsible to know except people like me. To be on the ballot as a constitutional amendment, a bill must pass the legislature twice in 2 consecutive sessions. So these underlying 5 were bills that passed the Senate and Assembly each in 2 consecutive sessions. They do not have to be signed by the governor, so they don't reflect any opinion of the governor. But they were passed, and I voted for each of these 5, so you'll get the drift of where I stand. But, and in fact, they passed overwhelmingly. But let me talk about the first one. It's the constitutional amendment dealing with redistricting. So back up on redistricting. Every 10 years when there's a new census, every state legislature draws new lines for the, in our case, the Senate, the Assembly, and the members of the U.S. House of Representatives, Congress. Obviously very important. New York is losing one congressional seat this year because of the census, but there is a growth in population in New York City and in Westchester. We're now over 1 million people. So there will be a redrawing of lines. Also, the lines have to adhere to certain principles, which we adopted by a vote in 2014, which amended the Constitution and changed the process slightly. So I'm sorry to get into the weeds, but such is the nature of a constitutional amendment. So in 2014, we adopted a process to draw new lines. It's called an Independent Redistricting Commission. The idea is, if possible, take it out of the legislature's hands to draw their own lines, because you know they're all about self-interest, and give it to a bipartisan group to draw lines. So we created a bipartisan group. It has 3 members chosen by the Democrats, 3 members chosen by the Republicans, and a 7th member chosen by both parties. That group was supposed to draw one set of proposed lines based on the new census data. So the new census data came out, and they drew proposed lines. However, no surprise to anyone in this room, the Democrats and Republicans could not agree on the lines. So the whole point of having this independent redistricting is they were going to give us these sort of nonpartisan lines. It didn't work out that way. The Democrats drew one set of lines, the Republicans drew another set of lines. Now they're having another set of hearings, and they will draw another set of lines. Maybe in a perfect world they will come to agreement, but we're not in a perfect world, so they may not come to agreement. The 2014 amendment that we adopted anticipated they would come to an agreement, they would draw some lines, they would give them to the legislature, and it set forth the process for the legislature to adopt those lines. Now, just to give you an example, many of you know I have the seat that George Latimer had when he was in the Senate. It goes from McLean Avenue in Yonkers on the Bronx border up to Bedford. It is a very gerrymandered district, intentionally so. The intention of a new independent redistricting commission was there were going to be less of that sort of drawing lines to favor one party or the other, and lines based on more common principles of how lines should be drawn. And I'll talk about that. So there are some principles about how lines should be drawn. You're supposed to have communities of interest. I always give the example of Portchester. So if you divided Portchester into, if you took that downtown, this is 70% Latino, and divided it in half, and put one half with the one part of Portchester and the other part with Rye, you might make it very hard for a Latino person to be representing a community that is 70% Latino. So the point of these redistricting principles, which are in law, are they're supposed to be communities of interest. You're supposed to try not to divide cities, towns, and villages in half, although some are, I can say that. You're supposed to try to protect people who are in prison by having them noted as where they lived before being incarcerated, because this was a technique of the old school that all these upstate prisons would get big populations because people were housed there. Some of these things were changed by law, but here now we come down to this First Amendment. This amendment reforms or modifies what we did in 2014 in several specific ways. Freezes the number of state senators at 63. Not important to anyone here except me as a state senator. We have 63. It's fine. This would freeze it. Amend the process for the counting of the state's population. That is the point I've made here. Inmates would be counted at their place of last residence, not for anything other than counting how many people live in a district, so that we have approximately the same amount in every district. Repeal and amend requirements for the appointment of the co-executive directors. So you remember I said there were Democrats and Republicans on this redistricting commission. This tries to create a process by which each party gets a co-chair of the redistricting commission. That's all fine. Here's the thing that has caused a little bit of problems. In 2014, the constitutional amendment we adopted provided that if we, the legislature, accept those maps that this independent redistricting commission does, there's two different rules. If we're all of the same party, the Democrats in the Assembly and the Democrats in the State Senate, which is the case now, we would have a higher threshold of who must vote for it, because this was a partisan effort by the Republicans who were in control of the Senate at that time to say, don't let the Democrats draw their own lines. So if the parties were different, there would be a high threshold. If the parties were the same, there would be a 60% threshold. Now we are saying, look, forget all that. If we adopt the plans of the Redistricting Commission, 60%, regardless of parties. We are the majority in the Senate. The Democrats right now, if the Republicans are the majority, they get 60%. In the Assembly, Democrats are the majority, 60%. So we are saying, don't make the vote dependent on the party leadership of each side. I think this is a simple principle when there's a majority that the people have voted for, and it's not a plain majority, it's not 50.1. We're saying a higher threshold, 60%. So you probably need to get people from both parties to agree on some things. That should be the standard. So this amendment, what it does, it says regardless of the party leadership in the Senate and the Assembly, if we adopt the plans of the Redistricting Commission, there would be a plain 60% vote required. Now, if we don't adopt the plans, we still are authorized to draw our own lines. So we will draw lines, in my opinion, that are fair and respect boundaries and don't do what I described in Portchester if we don't accept these lines. But so far, we don't even have proposed lines. So it's a little bit of a whole big argument over something that's unlikely to happen, but that's what this amendment is about. And so here's who's in favor of this First Amendment. Common Cause, which says it's necessary but imperfect. NYPIRG, necessary but imperfect, and then a whole bunch of other groups, including the United Federation of Teachers, Community Voices Heard, Citizen Action of New York, 1199 SEIU, Sustainable Portchester, many other faith-based groups. Here's who oppose this First Amendment. The League of Women Voters of New York State, not very strongly, but they say it weakens the role of the minority party because it doesn't give them this extra boost, which I described, which I think is a little bit like a filibuster in the sense that you have a majority, and it's a majority plus. You have to get up to 60%. So I don't buy them. And Citizens Union, which expressed concern about it as well. So I strongly support this. I think I voted for it. I believe we need to improve the process by which we draw lines. I happen to have originally favored a strong independent redistricting, but this was the compromise that was worked out, that we have this independent redistricting. They're going to make recommendations. Hopefully they draw good maps. Hopefully we adopt their maps. Hopefully we do it by 60%, which means that you have to get some consensus, and then we go forward. I don't know what's going to happen this year. We'll wait for the second set of maps. There is a hearing process. People can actually testify at their hearings and let them know their opinions about where lines should be drawn. Because not everybody understands, you know, Rye and Portchester and Blind Brook and Rye Brook, and, you know, not everybody knows every community as well as we all know them. And so there is value in testifying at this hearing, and I will get the word out when that happens. So sorry to be so complicated about the first one. The first one is a big mess because of this sort of inside ball game, which is not really relevant to anyone, but I believe we owe it to people to explain it. So I hope I didn't make it too complicated. It is a little complicated. The second one, a constitutional right to clean air and water. So right now there's, you have the right to clean air and water in statute, that's in New York law, and under some federal laws, and you can sue. But to put it in the state constitution creates a much stronger ability to challenge a decision. Let's say somebody puts a plant right next to this that is burning some kind of oil or creating something that's going to pollute this land. Rather than just having a civil lawsuit, you'd now have a state constitutional claim that they were violating your right as a person who enjoys the J. Heritage Center to having clean air and water. This is strongly supported by a number of Westchester groups, Save the Sound, for those of you in the Sound, sure, Untermeyer Gardens Conservancy, from those Yonkers people here, New York League of Conservation Voters, and others. So this is really a basic principle of expanding the Constitution in New York, which, by the way, is in many respects stronger than some provisions of the United States Constitution, but it gives that constitutional right if a decision is made that has an adverse effect. It gives the plaintiff more right to challenge. So that, I think, is a fair, no one opposes it, and it's a pretty straightforward one. The third one, if you turn your paper over, is in the Constitution now, it says that a citizen must be registered to vote at least 10 days before an election. I'm not talking about changing parties in a primary. That's a different thing. This is, I just became a citizen. I just got my citizenship. I want to register to vote, but it's only 3 days before the election. I have all the proof required to show I am eligible to vote, but I can't register. This would change the Constitution and say if the legislature wanted to change the law, it could. The Constitution would not be a bar. Again, I voted for this. I think there will be debate in the legislature over whether to change it. Some people are not in favor of people registering right before an election. I think there's a legitimate discussion about that, but that being said, it ought not to be determined by the Constitution that if you became a citizen 5 days before, or you moved to New York and you met the eligibility criteria and you wanted to vote, after all, we want people to vote who are authorized to vote, this would allow the legislature to amend the law. Pretty straightforward. Again, yes, Rich, I'll come to you in a minute on that one. Again, we passed this. I think that one, there's some division in the legislature about that one. No excuse absentee voting. So this fourth one, under the current New York State Constitution, again, I'm making the point that the Constitution has some of these old things in it that we're trying to update. In order to be technically eligible for an absentee, this is outside of COVID. COVID had special rules, so take that out of your mind for a minute. You had to be unable to appear at the poll by reasons of absence from the county or illness or physical disability. So if you right now got taken to the hospital and you're in the emergency room and you didn't apply and say this, technically you'd not be eligible for an absentee ballot. Now, one, we had the experience in COVID where we changed under executive order that everybody was eligible for an absentee ballot, you remember, and how many people voted, and it worked quite well in New York in expanding the number of people who participated, and there wasn't any evidence of fraud in New York at all about this. This one, in fact, the boards of elections have been challenged, and by reason of a court decision, if you request an absentee ballot as a practical matter now, you can get one. But this would change the Constitution and say you do not have to be absent from the county. Like, I know I'm going to be in Pennsylvania, or I know I'm going to be in a nursing home or ineligible to vote. This would really, again, this is part of our commitment in our Democratic majority in the Senate and in the Assembly to expand the opportunity to vote by absentee, as many states have. Red and blue states all over have used it very well. So that would allow what they call no excuse absentee voting, which, as I said, we had in COVID. The fifth one doesn't matter to us very much, but it's on the ballot, so I explain it. It increases New York City civil court jurisdiction. New York City has something different than we have here called a civil court, where you can bring civil actions up to $25,000. I always use the case when your contractor messed up your kitchen and you want to sue them, and it used to be under $25,000 and now it's $40,000. So this would increase the limit to $50,000. That, again, I voted for. That's sort of no controversy. There's very little controversy about anything other than number one, and I don't want to overstate the controversy. That's why I explained all these groups that do support it, because it's really a little bit of inside baseball of the process of redistricting. At the end of the day, redistricting is incredibly important because it really does decide who has power and how these lines are drawn. But this particular amendment doesn't go to the heart of redistricting. Those principles about having community of interest, not dividing towns and villages if possible, hopefully not dividing cities if possible, these are principles that will survive regardless of what happens to this amendment. Those are the basic principles we have adopted in 2014 for how lines should be drawn. Let me just see if I messed up or missed anything here in my first 5. Let me mention the county one, and then I'm happy to jump into questions. Let me just see on this first one. I mentioned incarcerated individuals. The rest of it is ridiculously technical. The county proposition: should the County of Westchester amend its laws to enact a new and comprehensive code of ethics, including a detailed code of conduct, updated disclosure requirements, and clarifying the structure and authority of the Board of Ethics to oversee, implement, and enforce the law? This is, as I understand it, a modernization of the county's ethics law. You know, they have their own, just like cities do. And Leah Wynn voters, according to George Latimer today on a call, has endorsed this proposal. I believe the code of conduct of the county on ethics is quite out of date, like many of these are. And I think there is a sense now that these things are really relevant. People engage in conduct that ought to be challenged. And I'm a strong believer personally there should be quite strong codes of conduct at the municipal level. Just to give you an example, you do not have to file any disclosure if you, for example, are a consultant for a builder or someone else who wants to create new housing and new development. And of course, all of our communities are experiencing this pre-COVID and now, where development is coming. Some of it is great, but don't we want to know who is hired to represent these people before the village board, the town board, the planning board, the county board? I believe we should know, just like we know for lobbying. When you lobby, you have to file a document in Albany that's publicly accessible on a website. And I think now that we have development going in a lot of places in Westchester, and we're concerned about sort of who's doing what to who, we ought to require disclosure. So my only point there is to say that modernization and focus on county and local boards of ethics and conflicts of interest, I believe, is an area where we really should focus and do better, because we can build and improve our county with strong rules of ethics and codes of conduct. They're not inconsistent, but disclosure is the best disinfectant, as they say. So that's my 2 cents, and I'm going to give my 2 cents, as I said, because I'm lucky enough to be here. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to stop. I know Rich McSpadden had a question about 1, or not number 1. Maybe you had a question. Which one?
1 and 3.
1 and 3. Okay, go ahead. Go. Shoot.
3. So 3 is the same-day voter registration.
Yes.
I'm just curious, is there any data on how many instances might this be applicable to? How, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How many people would be,
Well, I
get there?
I don't know the answer, but here's the logic behind it. It just says to the legislature, you may elect to do this. So those that support it are going to come forward and say, you know, in Mamaroneck, Yonkers, New Rochelle, I'm just thinking of my district, in Portchester, 30 people become citizens within 10 days of the registration deadline. So let's let those 30 people vote. But other people may say, no, you know, it's too close to the time, and we can have a debate at that time. This is just saying the Constitution should not be a bar. These decisions about voting registration should be made by the legislature, generally speaking, where people can have their voices heard. So I don't know how many. I do know this example I'm giving, because I'm just thinking of Portchester or some other places where the citizenship is going strong even during COVID. People are taking the classes, taking the test, and passing, becoming United States citizens. In my opinion, we should make the process available to them, provided they meet the requirements of voting.
And for proposal 1 is the redistricting. Is the intent right now to accept the independent group's recommendation?
Well, the problem is they couldn't agree on one. So if they agree on one, if in the next iteration, which comes in a few months, it's got to come before January,
So the independent group is going to go over it again?
they're going to have a second set of maps. They're having another set of hearings, and they're going to have a second set of maps. If they agree on a map, we certainly, I mean, I certainly am open to it. The first set of maps for my district, I went up to Purdy's and Golden's Bridge from the Bronx border, which, you know, I don't know what the community of interest between McLean Avenue and Purdy's is, but it's, you know, I'm just saying, if it's a rational map, I think we should be very open to it. But so far, we do not have such maps before us. Maybe we will. Yes, Susan.
When you were explaining if it doesn't work out, then the legislature chooses to draw it.
Can draw its own maps.
Doesn't that defeat the point?
Well, it was a compromise in 2014 between those who wanted an independent redistricting commission and those who wanted the legislature to retain their power. So it was a compromise, sort of a half-half, like you're saying. If this independent group can get together on a bipartisan basis and come up with fair maps, then we're open to doing it. But there were people in the legislature, particularly some of the, I don't mean older chronologically, because I'm old chronologically, but I mean older in terms of being there a long time, who wanted to preserve their ability to draw their own lines. And they were not in favor of ceding the power to an independent redistricting commission. So it was a compromise in 2014. It wasn't perfect. It was challenged by some of the good government groups as not being perfect. But, you know, that's the nature of the process at the time. I was in the Assembly, and at the Assembly, some members wanted a truly designate this group, you draw the lines. And other people were like, no, we're not giving it to somebody else to draw the lines. So they're going to draw a line around my house, and I'm not going to be in my district anymore. So, and these things happen. I would say generally, and I think most people agree with me, one of the problems in elected life is people get consumed with re-election and not with their job as elected officials. We can't do this job to guarantee our re-election. That's sort of a backwards way. We're supposed to do the job, and if we're good, get re-elected, or if we're out of power, out of favor, not get elected. So, but I would be honest and say there are certain individuals always for whom re-election is a very dominant factor in their thinking. So it was a compromise. And I think, you know, it wasn't perfect, but now we're trying to make it a fairer compromise by saying, regardless of party leadership, if we want to adopt the plans, 60%. If we don't want to adopt the plans, we'll draw our own plans. So far, I don't know what's going to happen. Rich, in answer to your question.
What happens if it doesn't get to 60%?
It really has to, because we need lines. We are required to draw new lines. So we have to find a compromise that can get to 60. Yes, there is a time deadline. Petitioning starts in February, so I think it's, I forget, the date, Andy might know the date. In January, we have to have it done. And we have to give it to the Board of Elections. I mean, they have to make the process, and then people who want to run have to know where their district is. I mean, new people too, not just incumbents. You know, anybody who wants to run needs to know, do they live in this district? Do they have a chance, et cetera? Yes?
Do the lines, where the lines get drawn, determine who isn't a senator anymore?
No. Anybody could run. So let's say they draw a new line.
Well, I mean, we lost a seat, right?
No, that we lost seat in the House.
Oh, okay.
We lost seat in the House of Representatives. So what's likely to happen there is an upstate seat, a district is likely to be consolidated because you need approximately the same number of people per district. Like I have 320,000 people in a Senate district, and that's going to be sort of probably the baseline. So there are some districts upstate where they have fewer people, but they drew a district for them, you know, for themselves, basically. But Congress is a different situation. We are going to lose a seat for the state of New York, and that is in part why there's so much interest in redistricting, because the congressional, the fate of Congress sort of depends in part on how New York and other states draw their lines. Obviously, we're not like Texas and these other states. We're not drawing lines that are truly party-driven. I really can say that as a person myself. I'm in a party, and the party's in the majority, but we have a responsibility to draw lines that are fair and respect communities. So I don't think that's a risk of that. Yes, yes.
Yes, I have a question on proposal one. I'll admit I studied the details a bit, and if I understood it correctly, one of the proposals is to eliminate the requirement that the co-executives of the Independent Redistricting Commission come from different political parties. And
Yeah.
I was wondering why that was, given the emphasis on non-gerrymandering.
Well, I think, for example, there are experts on election law who are not party-specific. Unfortunately, I've worked with a few in my career. They're truly not like party-affiliated. They're truly experts on election law. So I think the idea is if there's appropriate people that people want to choose as the designees, they don't necessarily have to be of different parties. The designees to the commission are of separate parties. But there really hasn't been much pushback on that, I would have to say, because I think the expectation is generally the majority party in each house is going to want to have someone of their party, but it is not spelled out, you're right. And I forgot to thank Suzanne back there for her always reaching out and being a fantastic, truly fantastic, inclusive leader here at the J Heritage. Thank you, Suzanne. I'm sorry I didn't say that earlier. Yes, now,
May I ask a second question?
yeah.
This one's on proposal number 2, which I think is a wonderful proposal, the clean air, clean water, healthful environment. I was just curious whether in the deliberations there's been discussion within the legislature on where the substance is going to come for that. And the reason I ask is you mentioned there'll now be constitutional litigation. I was involved in the homeless families litigation. We're the only state, I think, with a constitutional
Right.
shelter. It took us 25 years to litigate against New York State and New York City to put some teeth into that. And I'm hoping it's not going to take 25 years to put some substance into this amendment.
Oh, well, I agree, and I've been very involved, as you know, as education chair in the constitutional right to a sound basic education, which also took 20 years for the Court of Appeals to hold was a constitutional matter. We're trying here to sort of get ahead of that by saying it is expressly constitutional. We don't have to wait for the court to determine it. Now, how it's actually implemented, to your point, might take some time. But we did pass the CLCPA, the strongest climate protection act in the country, pre-COVID, so I don't know what year that was, 2018, I guess, or 2019. And that already will give us sort of a jump step to have basic principles of what moving towards carbon neutrality sooner. But obviously these cases are going to be litigated. It's going to take time. Fair enough. No, of course. Other questions? Yes.
On number 1,
Yes.
so at the congressional level, we lose the seat.
Yes.
So the entire state of New York has to be divided into fewer regions.
Congressional districts. Yep.
But on the Senate, we stay at 63,
Yes.
regardless of the population change.
No, we know. I'm sorry.
But
Yeah.
there's more people living
Da-
in New York and here, so the redrawing, then the 63, there'll be more districts in the southern part
But that.
now than there would have been before.
But that's true about Congress, too. The districts that we have, yes, but the Senate districts will, I believe, reflect, if the principle is to have approximately the same number of people per district, yes, the growth in districts or the weighting of districts will be primarily downstate, because Westchester, New York City, and Long Island are where growth has occurred in the last 10 years.
So this area will gain proportionately, most likely.
I'd love to see it, but
And
no one's asking me.
hopefully you'll have a district where Moline and Rockland, and then Ossining, that you can't even get to by
That's,
a bridge, and you have to drive all the way around, and just to represent that portion.
that is an example of a sort of a ridiculous line. Gerrymandering. Rockland and Ossining. One important place in Westchester is stuck on to a Rockland which has its own challenges and its own issues in every respect. Having Ossining stuck in there was done for a gerrymandering partisan reason. And, you know, we're really trying to get away from that. I believe our maps will be fairer and not represent that kind of, I don't know what you want to call it.
Can I ask about number 2?
Yeah, sure.
Are there other states
Yes,
that have done this
yes,
already that we can
yes,
learn from their experience?
yes. I believe it is Pennsylvania, at least.
Not very many.
Not very many, but we have other, you know, other constitutional rights. Yes, Pennsylvania, thank you. Other questions, comments, complaints? Yes?
I had a question on
I see.
proposal number 1. What happens if this proposal gets defeated? I mean,
Oh.
what is the alternative?
Yeah.
What's the benefit?
So the benefit of this is, again, while someone may say it's imperfect, it is a step forward in making the Constitution represent better principles for drawing that will last every 10 years, and we don't have to go through this. For example, the counting of prisoners, the fixing the number, we don't have to go back and forth on how many senators there are. The principles that we adopted in 2014 remain. If it gets defeated, with the constitutional principles that are in the 2014 amendment will stay. So that would mean now that we have, if we were to adopt the maps drawn by the Independent Redistricting Commission, because we have 2 parties in control, we'd have a higher threshold to pass it, 75, which basically means you need the other party to vote for it. So that's really what that was an effort to do. But, you know, it's a fine balance when you get to be the majority, as you all know if you're involved in your local town and village. Once you get to the majority, the point is you can do many things. There are many things you need to talk to the other side about and try to reach consensus. I think we would have an effort to do so, but these lines have traditionally been drawn, frankly, largely by the Republicans in the state Senate to protect their majority. And now that the Democrats have the majority, there's going to be push and pull. But if it goes down, we would just have this current 2014 amendment provision remain in effect, and so be it. I think this is a step in the right direction. I don't want to oversell it, and I don't want to hype it up. It may not be perfect, but, the other thing is you have to pass these as bills. So to pass them as bills, you need to compromise just to get to the bill stage. If any of you have tried to get a bill passed, Susan knows. Everybody knows here, you don't get exactly what you want. I mean, just because we're talking about flooding in the next meeting I had a fantastic bill to create a flood mitigation council to require municipalities to talk to each other, so we weren't stuck with Rye doesn't talk to Blindbrook and Yonkers doesn't talk to Bronxville. It passed both houses with lots of Republicans, and the governor vetoed it. And now I'm going back and doing it again because after Ida, it's so clear that we got to talk to each other and work on a more municipal level. But my point is, if these bills that gave rise to these constitutional amendments were the process of negotiation themselves. So, such is the world of, making, what do they say? Making sausage. I don't make sausage, I don't know. Yes, Susan?
I have a question about the hearing that was
Yes, the upcoming hearing?
November 8th, I think. Do you have, talking points? Because I'm not sure what I would say, I like Monday jobs. I want to keep it. I mean, that's silly. I can't say that.
Yes, you can.
Well, that's not going to sway people,
No, but you could say, for example, we've talked about this in our office. Some of these people really may not know the sort of ins and outs of Westchester or of these districts. And I think it's worth educating them that, for example, some people have zip codes that do not reflect their municipality. Me too. So that's worth educating them. Don't draw the lines about zip codes. I live in Yonkers, I may have a Bronxville zip code. I live in, wherever. Zip codes are not the perfect solution here in Westchester. So these are things that are useful to educate them about. And so, and also if you think the lines of a district currently do a good job in representing the diverse interests within a district, I think one could say so. I wouldn't be shy. Don't be shy. You're not shy, but I know, but. Anything else? Yes,
Number 4.
okay.
During COVID, some states mailed out ballots to everyone and allowed early and drop off all kinds of things to help people get early. And that eliminates the whole issue of excuses for absentee, because everyone's getting their ballot weeks, if not months in advance.
That happened with the school board elections here, you remember during COVID.
That's right, happened.
Everyone, and I just would say that everyone, oh, it's gonna be terrible, no one's gonna know what to, it worked out fine. Lots more people voted in the school board than they ever voted before, because they got it mailed to them. So I was in favor of that, we couldn't get that passed.
Oh,
That couldn't pass.
discussed and
Yes, absolutely. There was a strong bill to require everyone to get an absentee ballot, so that didn't get there. So this is, again, the compromise that we're taking away the constitutional bar for the absentee ballot. And right now, you can request an absentee ballot online on the State Board of Elections website. We have improved the process dramatically to make it easier to apply.
Does that require a constitutional?
No, because as I said, the case law, as opposed to the Constitution, the courts have held that you can apply for a constitutional
No,
amendment.
I'm sorry, I mean to go to the
Board of,
direct mailing to everybody.
yeah, that would require a constitutional amendment.
And that would mean 2 more sessions would have to,
Yeah, that's hard to get. We did it,
so it couldn't even happen for years.
well, I don't want to get too technical, but in COVID, because we gave the governor extraordinary powers, he had the ability to do these kinds of things on his own, and that's how some of that happened. Then we took the powers away. We could grant, there's things we could do to make it easier. We are making absentee voting much easier. We've made early voting. We're going to continue to go down that path, everything we can do. So are there any other questions? Please feel free to reach out to me in my office with any questions. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about these. I'm sorry to be so technical, but that's the nature of these things. And I think people deserve the opportunity to understand what's actually on these ballots. I'm worried people won't turn them over. It's I've missed them myself by not turning over in past years. So we're trying to draw attention to it. And again, I did ask the Senate to produce these and to send them out because regardless of your views on them, we want people to be educated now that we pass these things and they're going to be on the ballot, and they really do matter. So if I don't, I'm going to go talk about flooding, so I'm happy to talk about flooding. But thank you very much for the opportunity to come by, and thank you for listening very much.